All right, so thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Griffin Art Projects is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Stolo nations, and we are honored and grateful to undertake our work here. So thank you very much for joining us for a live virtual artist talk with our current artist in residence, Chase Keetley. A huge thanks, Chase, for your time in presenting today. We really appreciate it. So my name is Jazz Keeler, and I am the Contract Virtual Programs Coordinator with Griffin Art Projects. And before I pass the mic over to Chase, I just have a few super quick housekeeping notes. So first off, I wanted to mention that we have enabled Zoom's closed captioning today, which we're super thrilled to be able to offer, but I did want to mention that it is not perfectly accurate. And I noticed in particular, it has trouble with names. So both place names and people names. So just bear with us in that regard. And I did want to mention that we are recording today's talk and we'll be posting it online to our website afterwards. And we'll be sure to go ahead and correct any mistakes in names or places before posting it online. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. And we also do like to ask participants not to record it on their own device, as we'll be making the recording and making it available afterwards. I also wanted to mention that we are in webinar format today, which just means that although you can see us, we can't see or hear you, but do feel free to get in touch with us using the chat option at the bottom of your screen. And I also wanted to mention that to the left of the chat, there's a Q&A dialog box as well. And Chase will be answering questions at the end of his talk. So if at any point throughout the presentation, a question pops into your head, feel free to go ahead and put it in the Q&A dialog box. And we'll be getting to those at the end of the presentation. At which point there'll also be the opportunity to ask your questions out loud. So if that's your preference, and we'd love to hear from you, go ahead and indicate that you'd like to be unmuted, and we'll go ahead and do that for the Q&A. So I think that's all for my notes. I'm really thrilled to introduce Chase, who is, as I said, our current artist in residence at Griffin Art Projects. And Chase is a multidisciplinary African-Canadian artist whose work is based in the Black experience. He primarily investigates the mimicry and use of Blackness, such as the appropriation of cultural practices and iconography rooted in the Pan-African Ethnography. Keetley's practice takes a close look at the identities, desires, and the investments of non-Black people and how they live vicariously through Black culture and how they actively participate in anti-Blackness. Keetley is constantly confronted by our nation's choice to exclude Black history from Canadian history. Important information about Black Canadians' works and their personal history continues to be omitted. In the summer of 2018, Keetley launched Black Arts Vancouver alongside Berlin Beam, and the two co-founders facilitate artist-run workshops highlighting the importance of intergenerational learning as a source of decolonizing and how this can be a source of connection through healing. Keetley has dedicated the majority of his practice to the research in and around British Columbia's Black history, while providing safe space that centers Black, Brown, and Indigenous youth. They teach and encourage creative ways to help their youth think more critically about who they are, where they stand in history apart from the white settler narrative. So again, thank you so much, Chase, for your time in being with us here today. And I'll pass the mic over to you.
Hey everyone. I'll just start off with my land acknowledgements. Just give me a moment here. So I'd like to acknowledge that being in North Vancouver for this residency, I'm actually at home, but I'm just going to acknowledge that I have a residency there. Being in the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and the Stolo Nation. Yeah, that part. Sorry, I don't know how to end properly sometimes. Anyways, we'll just get into it. My name is Chase Keetley. My pronouns are he, him. I am African Canadian, and I am secondly an African Canadian artist, and I like to emphasize the two and recognize my circumstances, being the descendant of enslaved Black people in North America whose ethnic identity was completely erased, as well as the privilege of working as a Black settler on the stolen land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people as an artist. Some of you may know my work. For those that do not, I have been working on an ongoing research project into Northwest Coast Black history and settlements for the past few years, for the benefit of Black Arts Vancouver and for the benefit of my art practice. As a Black artist in Canada, I found that one of the many challenges is trying to ensure the work I produce continues to stay useful and valid to the people I represent. Right now, I'm in the process of asking questions and ideas around permanence, more specifically Black permanence. I'm seeking to challenge these misguided notions of existing elsewhere as a highlight, making it seem as if we never existed in the city of Vancouver or in the province of British Columbia, or even in this colonial pseudo-country we call Canada. This past year, we have all seen a rightful age and sadness from Indigenous people and Black people in Canada regarding police brutality and race and gender charged murders and the continuation of violently stealing Indigenous land for its resources and capital. When I think about the Indigenous and Black lives left in destruction, I think about how Black neighborhoods that sat on Indigenous land as an anomaly based on an unfortunate circumstance. So I will start with the first slide. So I'll share my screen here. So first slide is some work that I made for a grad piece back in 2018. Some of you have seen it. So I'll just start this. So in 2018, I produced an installation piece titled Ofcourse as an homage to Black citizens of Vancouver who once lived and loved in the heart of the neighborhood Strathcona, which was originally Black Strathcona, and before that was part of the Musqueam Nation, what they now call the area of Chinatown. Union Street was what they called Hogan's Alley, which ran up Union Street up into Adanac, ending at Commercial Drive. Hogan's Alley was taken away from us and destroyed around circa 1970 for the installment of the Georgia Viaducts. I think about how these people who were here and how they simply are now not. Fragments of literature and literature about their lives and experiences are mixed in with the information regarding Canada's truths into some of these paintings, recorded and inserted into these paintings and sculptural pieces. So, I was trying to get to an image here where I can show you guys. Okay, so this right here is what I'm talking about. So some of the information that I took from some of the research that I was reading at the time, and I just kind of mixed it in. I didn't really have any real plan for it. It was just kind of just information that seemed significant to me at the time. And I guess it's like the unearthing of hidden truths evoke emotional responses, intentionally undoing the Canadian palimpsest. For those who don't understand what that word means, it's just about like, I guess you could say like generation over generation, or like civilizations that kind of build on top of civilizations. I guess one example would be like Rome, or you know, any old civilization that's been built upon. And then in this sense, the idea of building a city on top of indigenous land, and then also, you know, then building something else on top of that. Where am I? Yeah, so I use the word palimpsest for its accuracy in how Canada commits generational genocide. The City of Vancouver has recently teamed up with Hogan's Alley Society to have it rebuilt for Black and marginalized people to live in again. Although it's not as positive as one may think, the plans for this new site have forced this notion of living in an area where Black people were forced to live in the first place. It's one thing to take away a neighborhood that means everything to Black permanence in the city of Vancouver. So let's go back to some of these images. So with this, I was kind of playing with copper and different materials. I'm trying to emphasize this idea of, I guess, a lived space. Right here, you can see it kind of looks like some paneling, side paneling, some floors. So just little fragments of things. So I'm playing with a lot of symbols here. With the copper, I just really kind of liked how it looked. And I liked how the color, muted colors with it. Color has a lot to do with it. And then I will show you. And then it started to kind of create these shadows, which I really liked, which I'm starting to get back into again. So a lot of this was made, was kind of unplanned and just was made while the work was being installed. I work as an installation artist in a lot of ways. So a lot of the work that I create isn't really made until it's completely installed into a space. Sorry, I'm trying to go down. Here we go. So yeah, these prints here, I'll talk really quickly about them. So I was playing with lithograph, I believe, some copper lithograph. And this imprint of a hand is actually was a drawing that I made of the book Bluesprint by Wade Compton. And I'll get into that later. Again, here I'm playing with copper, but here to kind of signify like a figure, someone living in a space. I think I was more or less thinking about like a restaurant on Union Street called, I think it was Vi's Chicken and. It was it was a restaurant owned by a Black owner on that street. Was taken away because of the viaducts. But I'm really just trying to show you the experience of like what this implies, more or less. So I talk a lot about transplantation in my work and what that means in my work and outside of my work. And I think what I'm trying to say is, just give me a moment here, is that with these houses, I guess you could say, they're not completely structures. And I think that's the idea, as if it's like being suspended in the air. This idea of suspension, meaning that you can't completely situate yourself in one place, that you're continually being moved throughout time. These spikes are to symbolize, oh my God, my words are horrible, symbolize the workers that worked on the trains during the, I think it was like the early 1900s. A lot of the Black workers would come in as porters, not necessarily working on the train, but some did work on the train. But yeah, a lot of this information is omitted in a lot of the archives online. So I like to symbolize this idea of like being forgotten, because a lot of these spikes actually were on the train tracks just behind, where was it? Like I think you go past Terminal, and there, you can just walk around, but a lot of these train spikes are still there. And I thought that was really significant because they were part of the original train tracks, and they just kind of just threw them out on the ground. And I don't know why I made that connection, as if like, just history just being forgotten. And that's kind of what it made me think about. And it's funny too, with these train spikes here, I actually kind of, I had them in a pile or in a certain place, and people weren't even really paying attention to them. They were kicking them. I just thought that was really funny, just the attention span that people have, or just not really paying attention to a certain space. Yeah, so this is another painting, part of the series. Here we have some more copperworks. This is kind of some more oil. I used to work with a lot more in oil, and I'm getting back more into it. It's just, it requires space and time and effort, which again, is a lot of effort to get back into painting again after not painting for so long. But this was an experience that I had, and then I wrote it down in reflection of the theme around the work, or theme around the overall series of the work. So this piece was kind of wasn't originally put into the work until last minute. But with this, I was kind of thinking about the over-imaginative or the over-sensationalized look at Black bodies, where you have, where you have, intestines or internal organs that aren't actually real, just the imagination of what they might look like inside of imagined bodies. I think this is a very common practice in pop culture to over-sensationalize Black bodies. Again, this is part of the show installation that I had at the Cheeky Proletariat, which is something that I am now running with Black Arts Vancouver in partnership with Cheeky Proletariat. And they'll be running this summer. I'm going to be having, I think, one artist per month. But why this space felt so significant to me at the time was because this is one of the only Black spaces being run in 2018. Like, still right now, there's really no other Black spaces. There's one being put up in Surrey right now, but I found this space really powerful in that way, because it is right in the center of East Vancouver, Lower East Vancouver, and right where a lot of homeless people are living. And this space was actually very significant to them. I've had a few people come up to me while I'm installing the piece and just asking how they can get involved. People that live in this area really love seeing this work, because it kind of is like a reflection of that area and what goes on. Some people don't like the work. I don't know if I took a photo of it, but there's actually like a big gouge in the window where someone actually threw a rock at it, tried to break the window. Luckily, it didn't break the window. But this was also in partnership with Naya Lewis, who runs Black Arts Gastown. They took me on part of their summer series. And then what I will do is I will move on to some more dialogue. So the City of Vancouver, yeah, I read that, sorry. Yeah, so I remember this past summer, actually, I was a part of a protest for Hogan's Alley. And I was actually at the east end of the viaducts, and a Black woman shouted out at the bridge, you know, this is where our ancestors were. This is where our cemetery was. You know, this is where it was built, you know. And I had the instant image of Black bodies, you know, literally just being built on, you know. And then I thought immediately back to, like, you know, how the city is actually built on Indigenous cemeteries or built on sacred land, you know. So if you really just take a second to let that just sit for a minute, that's, you know, you already know that, but then if you just actually let that sit, thinking about how there's actual literal bodies that the city is built on, you know, that's a lot to think about. But, you know, this is where I start to ask questions, you know, instead of trying to answer questions, because I don't think it's a place to really answer questions right now. I think it takes a lot of time to kind of to process this information, especially right now. I think a lot of people really want to hop on trying to contextualize what's going on, and people want to continue to, like, understand the implications of you know, what Vancouver is, especially coming from a very white perspective. I think a lot of people are trying to understand, but aren't taking the time to really just let it sit with them. And I think that's such an important process that people aren't comfortable with doing. So I will move on to the next slide. So this past October, I participated in my first residency in Port Townsend at Washington, which is situated on the land, Indigenous land of the Skull people. I came to this residency to continue my research into a specific actual date, which is Black Exodus from or Black migrants migrating up into San Francisco, into Victoria on the 17th of April, 1858. Sorry, just give me a moment here. And I'll just give a quick overview of what this date was. So in 1858, this is the year of the anti-Negro immigration law. And during that time, California just kind of became a state. So within the last 40 years, it just became a state after coming out of the Mexican Revolution. And I could go into it, but I'm not going to because it's a really long story. But it meant that Black people in the state of California had to have registration papers and carry their papers with them at all times, since Black people could not testify in court. In the state of California, what little autonomy they had was gone. And of course, many could not live this way and could not risk getting evicted, or worse, having to work as a slave. That's the other thing. So if you didn't have your papers, they gave you an option to work back for your papers, which basically is slave labor, and people weren't willing to do that, you know, of course. But some did, some stayed. So you could not live that way. In a single day, well over 200 San Francisco Black residents and migrants had departed for Victoria, British Columbia aboard the Captain Jeremiah Nagley steamboat, the Commodore, some call it, traveling over 1,000 miles by boat up the Pacific into Canada, arriving at Victoria on Vancouver Island. So this was also during the gold rush. So a lot of people were actually escaping slavery because a lot of the outer states still were still under slave law, whereas California wasn't. So California actually was a very attractive state to live in. So there was a huge surge of, not just Black people, white people, a lot of Asian people, a lot of European people, all coming up into the state because there was, I think, also this implication that there was gold, right? There was this idea that, I could get land. Land was cheaper as well. There was this land lots opening up for people, and people are mining for gold. So this idea of promise was implied. Like, if you come here, you'll have a better life. There's several different stories that talk about this experience, and I can give you references at the end. So then over several months after, there had been over 800 Black people that had left California to many different places across the continent, including South America and Mexico. There, I started a series that I'm continuing to work on here with Griffin under the theme Diasporic Departure. And that's what these images in front of you is, the beginning of a series. So I don't necessarily remember how I just stumbled upon this this word grouping. It's not necessarily a term that you can look up. Actually, I think I was talking to Berlin about it. But they initially said that diasporic migration. But then I was thinking about this form of departure, like this necessary form of departure. So this idea where historical presence is constantly being eroded. And I'll talk more about that and this idea of a palimpsest, but then also being rebuilt and redefined in a sense is not so literally a palimpsest, but it is because it's a very necessary departure. And I'll explain that term a little bit further. But at Centrum, I was thinking about what it meant to be there as a Black individual on Indigenous skull and land, where Centrum is situated is on army base. So, and throughout the whole, I guess, park, there's this huge army base that hasn't seen battle, and it goes on, I think, for about a few kilometers. It's huge. It's enormous. But in the barracks, there's this weird, eerie feeling that there's a lot of violence going on. I was sleeping in a general's quarters. Really nice, but it just, again, was really spooky. So, and then it was kind of making me think about the residency and thinking about the implications of just building on Indigenous land. So there's so many layers to unpack, yet there's no evidence of the military base to suggest that Indigenous people were here, except on some dinky pamphlet that was given to me when I arrived. People walked around as if there was nothing ominous going on there, and I knew I was unwelcome to the people who lived there, even though I was invited. The place may have seemed peaceful and full of life at first glance, yet extremely violent. Again, I think about the lives that were taken and people that once lived on this land, this violent act of erasure, on this idea of elsewhere, again, elsewhere, this idea that Canada, or I was in the States, but more so Canada, I'm thinking about when I go back. that, oh, racism doesn't exist here, or violence doesn't exist here, like we're peaceful people. Like I don't think I have to really explain that even further. I think the last 5 years have kind of introduced this idea that, like, yeah, of course, you know, Canada is racist, but it has a very polite way of doing it. It doesn't, it's not in your face. It's actually worse, you know. So in that sense, you know, they kind of push it aside. And this is a form of erasure. Mind you, this is a form of erasure. Based on this idea of promise. Now when I talk about promise, I want to go back to talking about permanence. And I think Black permanence in the city and its integral relationship to sustainability is based on this idea of promise. Just give me an idea. Just give me a moment. Sorry. We are promised so many things, yet we are left with nothing. So there has to be some form of departure. So this is what I mean. So throughout history, we're being transplanted from place to place, yet we still have no foothold. And when we do, it's taken from us. So when I explain this term, diasporic departure, there's no way for us to kind of retreat when something's taken from us. We have to immediately depart. So like there's very little history for us to kind of reconcile from, or to kind of just, you know, sift through. So you have to make anew. I'm basing these images here off this idea. And this first image here is one of a Moor named Esteban Nico, who was enslaved to a Spaniard conquistador in the year 900. His real name is Mustafa ibn Muhammad ibn Abdus Salam al-Zamor, which is Arabic. He was from the city of Azmir, which is the north region of Africa, the north region of the African continent. I became interested in this character because he apparently was the first explorer of the Americas, actually, more so into North America, but not just the first Black explorer either. He was the first explorer before Lewis and Clark. Some of the historical documentation talks about how he discovered New Spain, Mexico, and discovered gold in that region. So again, I go back to this idea promise is coming up in gold, you know. So even though he was enslaved, he continued his master's expedition, I hate to use that word, up into North America. He ends up exploring the whole continent. And then I asked the question, for what? You know, I mean, you could read on, and I don't think it's necessary to understand the answer. I think the question is really more the important, is more important. So in this image, I have two images here. I first did this one to my left here, and then I did the second one because I carved some wording in there. I didn't want it to be completely legible, but what it says is, what were you looking for? And it's spelled backwards. So, and the stance he takes on seems significant to me. And then I'll explain that in the next image. So this other image here is, second image is a very popular image of Archie Lee. And in the case of Archie Lee winning his freedom in the state of California. And he was actually a very significant role in the, I'll just talk about it because I have to now. So he won a case basically before the anti-Negro immigration was implemented. And this is when there was slave law, like still going on throughout the outer states, but California was had an anti-slave law basically going on. And so what he did is he ran from his slave master when they arrived in California. And so he tried to get his slave back. I hate using these words. But he couldn't. So it went to Supreme Court. Archie Lee won, long story short. And what this did is created a riot. You know, Black people were coming in, saw this as a huge opportunity for them because they're like, okay, cool, California is a great place to be now. Like, you know, I can live here without having to worry about, you know, being caught by anybody. But slave owners didn't like this idea. So there was this, you know, two-sided battle. And what had happened is that the legislation had passed this anti-Negro immigration law because they wanted to push out all the Black people out of the city because there was too many coming in, right? Yeah, and that's what sparked the exodus. So with this image here, again, the stance is significant. The figure looks as if he's, and the figure of Esteban Nico looks as if he's about to start running, you know, he's in a stance. And then in the next image, Archie Lee is running. Again, there's text that's spelling backwards. What are you running from? So, and then the third image is of me. I took a photo of myself kneeling in front of the Army barracks at Fort Worden, Port Townsend, Washington. I decided to make an image of myself because I felt I had arrived at a point of acknowledgement. I realized with this work that I've been doing, this research that I've been doing, I've been trying to find autonomy in myself as a Black person in British Columbia. As a Black person who was born here, realizing that my history of arriving in BC is not so different from these Black settlers who arrived here 150 years ago. Archie Lee, along with them, came from San Francisco into Victoria, BC, coming by boat on the same boat, the Commodore. My father was in the Navy, and he traveled all the way, all around. He came up into Vancouver Island, you know, met my mother, here I am. But he traveled to escape the similar circumstances. This idea that, you know, there's still promise. There's this idea of, you know, there's better things in Canada, or there's better things on the West Coast. I think there's just this implication that the West Coast is very rich and that there's opportunity here, still exists. So this pattern had arisen, and I realized that I was a part of this very long history of being transplanted from one place to another. So I realized that this idea of promised gold, land, agriculture, freedom of prosperity is what led up to the exodus in Canada's West Coast. This very long history of Esteban Nico starting in the year 900, you know, leaning towards this this journey, you know, which, you know, is a way is actually kind of a part of the Great Migration. You know, even though Great Migration kind of happened afterwards, but it was leading up into that. You know, the Great Migration happened in the 1900s. This happened in the 1850s, you know, so this is a long time coming. So why is there now no sustainability for Black presence in BC? Since there are so many Black settlements, or there were so many Black settlements. Why is British Columbia's documentation of Black history, literature, orchard meager? And why is there no foothold on what Black history and culture? Why is there no foothold here for us with Black history or culture? It goes back to this idea of palimpsest. I was introduced to this term called titalectics, which is introduced in the book by Wade Compton's editorial book, Bluesprint. And he talks about this Africanist model of describing history, seeing history as a palimpsest where generations overlap generations and eras wash over eras. So I want to think more imagery here, where is, it's violent in a way, but not so violent that you can see it. It's not like they're completely omitting Black history from letting us see it. Like if you go to the Vancouver archive, for instance, there's a section that says Black history, but nothing's filled in there. So it's like, yeah, that's there, but nothing's actually there. And I found that a really funny hindrance, oh, we're working on it. Or the city of Vancouver is like trying to implement this plan to build a new neighborhood with Hogan's Alley. Oh, we're working on it. Hints of things until you lose sight of something, or you lose your attention of something, and all of a sudden they'll do something else. So this is a very colonial understanding of genocide, is this idea of titalectics, where it slowly washes in and washes out, taking away things rather than building directly on top of things. Look at what's happening to Indigenous land. They made treaties with them. They sit here and act like they're in solidarity. They'll secretly do this under your noses, and you won't even see it until it's happening, and then you don't even have enough strength in order to make things happen. So you're sitting here trying to figure out what's happening, and it's just a very slow erosion, right? I think that's a pretty perfect word for the loss of history and the loss of things that you're trying to get back. Every time we transplant ourselves into a new place, we lose a piece of ourselves. Every time we, as Black people, are uprooted and forced out, we lose a piece of who we were forever. Again, going back to this idea of diasporic departure, where you depart from something, you are literally departing from something. You are leaving something behind, because the fragments aren't enough. You need to make something of a new. And I'll talk a little bit more about that if someone wants to ask a question about that. But I'm going to finish up here. So, that's why I asked the question in this image: have you arrived? Because I have departed. I've made the decision to depart from something. So yeah, this is the image of Esteban Nico, and this is Archie Lee here. Yeah, great images, honestly. Very powerful images. This is a piece that I made alongside the work. Isn't necessarily related, but I was thinking along the terms of how ancient white anger is. The killing of Breonna Taylor was a very ancient evil. So I kept thinking, how does that look in terms of visually? So I kept thinking of wanted signs. So on this image, they're looking for a Black girl, in this wanted sign. Again, here I kind of reversed it, where it's we're looking for these white males who are aggressive males, and I put like sweaty, ignorant, belligerent, because that's literally what they are, when they are implicating themselves on scenarios like this, and then, they're saved by the system. Like the system is what reinforces this ancient evil, and I think that's something to recognize. I think people need to recognize this isn't new. This is a very old way of thinking, Some more images here, just playing with more text. So here with this image, I think a few of you have seen, I was just kind of like trying to base myself where I was, trying to recognize the context of where I was without having to place words or anything. During the pandemic, I'm at a residency, I'm in a house, literally a house on my own, where these people are barely have enough money to live in a house, and, there's so much danger, and I'm completely safe from it. I still haven't really processed this information yet, but I feel like, someone used this term as if like, what's going on, is it a residency? Like people are at home, and they're like, oh, I don't feel motivated. And it's like, no, of course not. Like, why would you, So I think it's something to recognize, like, even though we have all this time to work, it's still a time to reflect on what exactly it is that, that you have versus what somebody else has versus the rest of the world. There's a lot to unpack, and that's what I'm trying to talk about, is like, it's hard, it's not easy to understand. You have to sit with it. You have to sit with it. You can't just immediately react to it. People want to be able to react to it to kind of just get over it, but there's no getting over it. So this is a part of this series again for Diasporic Departure. These are some old images I made of me in Berlin. I think I was thinking about this idea of, I guess, light energy. With I can't really reference exactly what I'm trying to say, but I'm trying to think about like how certain technologies can capture like life energy from like, say, like a leaf or something like that. So what I'm trying to do is trying to capture really quick instances of a certain image, right? What that image felt like, So I don't necessarily want to glorify in the image, but I want to capture something. So, and I think that's where I'm trying to go with this idea, where I'm just like, this is where it was, and this is where it is, just a quick, look at what that moment was. Sorry about that. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation, y'all. I'm gonna take any questions.
Thanks so much, Chase. I'm just going to unmute myself for a second, just to extend a massive thank you for your time and all of the work that you put into this presentation and the important work that you do and your research and your current projects. Just so wonderful to hear from you today. So thank you for your time and for sharing with us today. Now, I do know, Chase, you and I talked about taking a brief break between your presentation and questions. Do we feel like we still want to give perhaps a few minutes?
I think we're okay.
Okay.
Just like we only have 10 minutes, right? So.
Okay, so we'll just jump right into it then. As I mentioned before, we have the Q&A dialog box at the bottom of the screen. If you'd like to be unmuted, and as I said, we'd love to hear from you, so feel free to just write in the Q&A dialog box that you'd like to ask your question out loud. But wise, if you're more comfortable with it, I'm also happy to read questions. And it looks like we have one waiting for us from an anonymous attendee. So maybe we'll just jump right into it. So Chase, here's our first question. How does the materiality connect to your practice? It seems very constructive.
That's a very loaded question. Intuition, I guess you could say. I don't really understand how to. I think a lot of people know how to connect materiality to their work, but I think that's also why I work in a series, so that people can feel the work rather than like, oh, this is what it is. You know what I mean? And I think it's a great way for people to kind of connect your work without seeing text, like just to see like what they get from it. I think with like my last work, Ofcourse, I think it was a huge success to the beginnings of what my work is going to become. It's kind of like a foundation that I use now to kind of resort back to kind of just be like, okay, what was I thinking at that point? And how to not necessarily replicate that idea, but just kind of channel that same energy. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Thanks so much, Chase. That was wonderful. And it was wonderful to see the materiality of your artworks and how strongly evocative they were. I'm thinking back to your Ofcourse works and the railroad spikes and the wood and that layering is just so powerful. So thank you for expanding on that. We have a question again from another attendee who's wondering, can you speak a little bit about your experience in residency at Griffin Art Projects?
Yeah. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I was trying to unshare the screen. Okay. I mean, yeah, it's been a year. Like I was supposed to have the residency last year, but we had to move it because of COVID. It kind of worked out really well because now I have the time. I didn't really have the time during last year either, or the funds really. I think with residencies, it's kind of this, it has to be the right time. Like you have to have enough funds to work, and you also have to have the mental capacity and the energy to kind of like produce something. You know, there's obviously no pressure from nobody really putting it on you, but you have the pressure because you've been given the opportunity to work in a certain way. So working with Griffin, it's been really nice because they've been really flexible and understanding, and I think communication is a really big key when it comes to, I guess, just art in general. Like if you're communicating with a potential partner or you're communicating with a potential collaborator, I think it's really important to make sure that you have that dialogue going on all the time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chase. And yeah, Griffin is so thrilled to be hosting you and really looking forward to seeing your project and your research as it develops in the coming weeks. Yeah, such an honor. I do have a question for you because I know that your work with Black Arts Vancouver has recently took kind of an exciting turn, and I wondered if you could speak a little bit about that work and some of the projects or developments that you have on the go right now.
A lot of preparation. We're trying to gear up for the summer. I don't know, COVID's been really hard, man. It's honestly just been paying attention to what people are really into and what people would want to do. Right now, we've been just kind of focusing on trying to put together craft boxes or back to school boxes. We're trying to see if we can set up some kind of like programming for that, where we can kind of like give back to kids in schools. who don't necessarily have those resources coming back into school. And I think everyone understands how important that is. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to put together some of our literature into little booklets, and then some how-tos and some supplies, and then maybe like some kind of gift card, food card, hopefully a little bit more than that. But yeah, that's what we're looking to try and do. This we'll put them together this summer, and then we'll probably try to distribute them right before school starts in September.
Amazing. Yeah, that's incredible. That's really exciting. And you also mentioned in your presentation your work with the cheeky proletariat, which I thought was so amazing and really great to hear. And I wondered if you had anything to share, or if there's any links or upcoming programming that our audience members should know about.
Yeah, again, I'm still gearing up for that. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to see if I can have an Indigenous exhibition and then also a Black exhibition. I mean, I would love to have them in the same space, but I recognizing the very huge differences in culture that we have, I think it's really important to keep them separate but equal. So what I'm thinking about doing is having an Indigenous exhibition throughout the summer in the cheeky proletariat space, and then I'm probably thinking about having a separate exhibition maybe outside of the cheeky proletariat. I haven't really decided yet, but what I wanted to do is I kind of want to highlight that space for Indigenous artists right now.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing, Chase, and we'll look forward to seeing how that unfolds. And also, let's see, is there a way for people to donate or to help out with the packages you are putting together? And if so, we're happy to send that information out to our audience members, or any sort of support or ways that people can get involved.
Yeah, you can just email us. Should I just type it in? Well,
Sure.
It's really just blackartsvancouver@gmail.com. All lowercase. Yeah, you can send it right to there. If you have an idea for a project, just make sure you put your name and you put your whatever you want to do. You'd be surprised how many people contact us without a name, and we don't even know who they are. So yeah, it's really important. Also, your pronouns. Just give us a small introduction who you are before you decide to be like, hey, you want to do something?
Great. Yeah, and I'll be sure to send that information out in a follow-up email to our audience members today as well. So I'm just going to jump back on here again, Chase, because I realize we're at the hour mark, and I just wanted to, again, say a huge thanks on behalf of Griffin. It's been such a pleasure hearing from you today and learning about all of the amazing work that you do, both through the organizations that you founded or are working to run, as well as your own research and your art practice. So we're really looking forward to seeing it develop and for the rest of your time at Griffin. So a huge thank you.
Thank you, Jazz. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, all of Griffin. Yeah. Sorry.
Thanks, Chase. It's our pleasure. And thanks to everyone who joined us here today. And we're wishing you a great rest of your Saturday.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye.